specialist for OSSI. I'm really glad that you're joining us. I also want to give a very big shout out to Kelly Scholl. She is a data analysis manager for OSSI. Kelly and I work together to create the data tools that we're going to look at today, and we couldn't have created this without her, so I want to make sure she gets lots of credit. She's in another meeting today. She wishes she could be here, but she's here in spirit, and my goodness, she made a lot of tools for you. So, disclaimers. No one is an expert in what we're trying to accomplish right now, so the purpose of this session is for us to seek potential solutions together. For that reason, I'm going to ask you to come up with, share, generate ideas, and so I hope that you'll be open to doing that today. I'm going to show you some tools that we'll be using throughout. So could you please use the green check mark in your participant panel if you can now see the LEA toolkit, the PDF of the LEA toolkit, just making sure you're seeing the right thing on the screen. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see so many familiar names. I really appreciate you being with us today. So, a couple of things about this toolkit. This toolkit is basically your guidebook for everything we're going to talk about today, both the underlying regulations and law and principles of best practice that underlie the creation of the toolkit, but also the links to the digital tools that we'll be using today. I'm going to show you what I mean. In theory, I'm going to show you what I mean. Here we go. So when you get down into the different sections of text, you will see things like links, which I'll discuss later. These links are to some regs that you definitely should be familiar with if you're working in special education, and you want to make sure that your administrators are familiar with too. As you get down into the solutions section, you will see hyperlinks to tools. These links, when you click them in your own toolkit, will offer you the opportunity to make a copy of the tool so that it's your tool. And we're going to discuss later how you do that and then how you customize the tool for yourself, but I just want you to know that if you click this and something doesn't open, but it rather gives you the choice to make a copy, that's on purpose. A couple of reasons. Of course, we don't want to be editing over each other's work. Excuse me, just one second. Just one second. Can you please do me a favor, guys? Can you raise your hand if you can hear me? Thank you very much. Got it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay. I'm going to help one of my colleagues in just a moment. Oh, we're good now. We're good now. Super. Awesome. Sorry. Somebody was messaging me they couldn't hear. Got it. So, where was I? Oh, yes. So you're going to get your own copy of the tool so that we're not overriding each other's revisions, edits, or customizations, but also so that you can rest assured that the data that you collect with the tools I'm going to share today belongs to you and your LEA and isn't linked on some sort of back end to OSSI where we would accidentally be collecting data on your students, which is not something that we are trying to do. We're trying to give you a tool. So just so you know that. But even though we've got this tool today and it's really helpful, I think it would probably be better if instead of going and trying to open a bunch of digital tools, you use the electronic forms and tools PDF that I shared with you in the invitation. It just is made up a PDF version of all the tools we're going to discuss today. So as we go through this discussion, you can use this PDF to see what I'm talking about without having to go between a lot of different screens, which would just be maddening, and you would get stuck down quite a rabbit hole with that. Finally, we have a link to some virtual chart paper. I shared it in the email, but I'm also going to share it with you now in our chat box in case you didn't get it. This is going to go out to all participants. It is in the chat box. Once you open up this, you'll have the opportunity to respond to some of the discussion questions that we'll be raising in today's webinar. The breakout function of this webinar platform has not been reliable, and so we're going to rely on this digital chart paper, the chat box, and the Q&A section in order to communicate with each other. Moving forward, trainings are going to be offered in slightly different platforms, at least mine are, and so I want to be sure that today you have an opportunity to ask questions and to be heard, but rest assured that I'm looking for more interactive opportunities for us as we move forward. So again, the heads up on attendance, you gotta hang in here. You will get that survey at the end today, okay? We're gonna look at a lot more things, a lot more tools, but for now I'm gonna go back to our PowerPoint and kind of talk you through some of the underlying principles. First things first, I just want to let you know that we're going to get together again next Wednesday, same time, 1:30 to 3 o'clock, to talk about developing data-driven supports. We've really been talking about that the whole time, but we're going to do a deep dive into data-driven service provision and data-driven decision-making when it comes to designing recovery planning in your LEA overall. I hope you're going to be able to join me. These deep dive sessions, 1 through 3, are intended to help you get to know some tools that we shared in an introductory webinar on May 20th. I'm going to, when you're working on your some of your discussion prompts in the electronic chart paper, the digital chart paper, I'm going to be sharing links to a web page where you can get all the previous webinars. But today we're going to do a deeper dive and explore how the tools can work together to enhance your programming. Today's the second of 3 follow-ups, and as you become more familiar with this tool, which is, it's a lot, could you do me a favor? Could you do a green check if you feel like you've been in one of these trainings before and you feel like this is a lot to take in? Green check if you think this tool is a lot to take in. I got a lot of green checks. So if you're new, just know that you're not alone. When I start going through all the things it can do, that's why I'm offering multiple sessions so you can really dig in and get to know it. Don't hesitate to ask questions. If I'm not able to respond to your question here today, just know that all these questions that you ask in chat and in the Q&A feature are retained, and then Kelly and I can get back to you in a follow-up email. Again, I want to confirm that everyone can hear me. Could you raise your hand if you can hear me? Thank you. Appreciate that. So most folks have sound. Once we get to a place where you guys are working independently, I will do some troubleshooting around the sound for individuals. Okay. So today, we're going to be really focused on ensuring transparency and collaboration with families. This is marketed as something that's really specific to students with disabilities, and that's because as school changed and the context changed and school buildings closed, we had some serious immediate considerations that have legal ramifications and fiscal ramifications for schools, and so we were doing a lot of problem solving right out of the gate for students with disabilities, but that doesn't mean that everything that you're going to see in here today is not applicable to all the students that you will be serving. Everything that you'll hear could be adapted to enhance your service to other special populations, or to design data-driven supports for students and families, requiring all tiers of intervention across many different needs for assistance and additional support. So for the benefit of those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're going to quickly review the key principles that are foundational to service for students with disabilities and their families. As a way to frame that, I just want you to consider that while last time we got together, we were really talking about working with families to adapt the services that students were receiving and to document those changes. Today, we're going to be thinking about having things in place in your LEA that ensure transparency, ensure collaboration, and just make that transparency and collaboration baked into all of your processes and your programming in your building. So some examples of that would be ways that you can both invite and document meaningful peer engagement in the decision-making process, a variety of ways that you can communicate to families, what services students will and will not receive and why, some examples of how you can be customer service oriented and reciprocal in your engagement with families, and then ways that you can demonstrate your flexibility and your good partnership. All right. So we're going to talk about these key principles that are underlying service provision for students with disabilities. I just want to point out that these principles are the same as they were before COVID and that they have not changed. It doesn't say on this slide, you know, during remote learning or post-COVID for a reason. These things are foundational to providing students with FAPE, and that has not changed based on our context. So we're going to talk about that for a little bit right now, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Something that we're not calling out on the slide that is also a key principle underlying the tools that you're going to see today is my belief that I share with Kelly, my co-developer, that we need to be looking out for our students beyond the needs that are described in their IEPs, beyond their academic and social emotional needs, just to their basic needs, so that we are having opportunities to check in on our students and their families to ensure that none of our students are falling off the radar or between the cracks. And so when you look at the tools, you'll see some concrete examples of that, but I just wanted you to know that apart from the regulatory key principles, there are some values that underlie this, and those have to do with caring for whole children and whole families. All right, so the key principles, if you have not been here before. The first one is the LEA discretion and flexibility. We'll go in depth into that. But IDEA does afford you the discretion to be flexible. We don't always exercise that discretion to be flexible here in DC, because of the context and the history that has happened here. But we do have that discretion and that ability to be flexible as long as we continue to partner with parents. So we always need to have transparent communication with students and families in order to be able to identify solutions, especially in this context, and to make sure that we are documenting decisions and that we are doing that in such a way that really underscores that the decisions are team decisions. Finally, we always we're beholden to data-driven efforts to address students' needs for support, and that means that we have to be student-specific. We need to be specific in IEP development, in instructional support, but also as we consider receipt of educational benefit. So Department of Education has been pretty clear that even though all students have experienced the same shift of educational circumstances, the same response to that change in circumstances is not going to meet the needs of all students. So we have to continue to be student specific. Okay. So we're going to be focused on ensuring transparent collaboration. I just want us to think about today that in order to be flexible and provide students with services in a flexible way that is responsive to their changes in circumstances and the changes that have been imposed upon us by this pandemic, we still have to continue to partner with parents, and each partnership is going to yield the greatest benefit to students when communication is transparent and it's forming the foundation of mutual trust between the school and families. So in order to build these strong partnerships, LEAs need to clearly communicate barriers to service delivery and work with families to identify solutions. This means that you're going to have to engage in ongoing and reciprocal or two-way communication. We're going to provide you with some tools to help you do that today. The more transparent, collaborative, and proactive you are with students and their families during this time, the better off everyone's going to be now and in the long term. What you do now in collaboration with families can not just mitigate learning loss in the future, but can mitigate for the level of difficulty you're going to experience when we get past the recovery period and we start thinking about whether or not students have received educational benefit and whether or not they need compensatory services. And so I strongly suggest that you work hard now to make investments in real, authentic, reciprocal relationships with families. All right, so do me a favor, guys. Could you raise your hand if you had an experience where a student with an IEP in your building has suddenly run into barriers to service delivery? So the service they were getting before, they just can't get now. Oh, good, all the hands. Sometimes people are raising their hand 13 times. Okay, so you're gonna have barriers to service delivery. IEPs are written in to be very specific for a reason, right? They're supposed to be a set of instructions for providing the student with individualized supports and services. So they're going to be very specific. And so when you've had to suddenly change everything about the child's educational context, that specificity starts to feel like a problem. But DOE has acknowledged that we're going to have to think about states differently in the context of a national health emergency. And so the underlying principle here is that though we're going to have to be flexible, we have to make sure we're clearly communicating barriers to service delivery and work with families to identify solutions to those barriers. So students have always benefited from that when schools and families work together, but now parent engagement is not just valuable, it is absolutely essential. We need families to join us as instructional partners and in service partners. We need families to create an environment that supports learning and the receipt of services. We need families to collect and share data about student access, progress, well-being, whether or not their accommodations are working, how their services are going. And we need parents to do something really basic, which is ensure that students are physically available and emotionally available to receive services and instruction. Underlying that is just a reminder that this consideration of alternative means of providing supports is a task for the whole team, and it can be accomplished through the IEP amendment process. So there are multiple ways that schools can ensure effective collaboration and increase engagement, but these following three are really, really key. You can increase parent engagement by communicating that partnering with families is your priority. Some ways you can do this include ensuring that parents have not just a point of contact for scheduling and other questions, but also a backup contact. Please raise your hand if you anticipate that you may have some staffing instability this year. Yes, okay. So we don't want our families, whether their students have an IEP or not, to just have one point of contact. We want to make sure that people have a backup if they need to get in touch with someone at the school and someone who knows their child. It is really important that as we start thinking about scheduling service provision and meetings to make all these changes, we work hard to identify mutually agreeable appointment times, that we are trying to demonstrate that we are being as flexible as we can with parents, so that we know that, so that they know that we care and that we are trying. That doesn't mean that if a parent says, well, I'm only available at 11 p.m. on Friday, that's what you need to do. But it is important to give options and to give choice. And that takes us to the last point, right? Everybody likes to have choices. Nobody likes to get a letter that says, we're having this IEP meeting at 2 o'clock next Tuesday, and there's no options. So for LEAs to ensure that parents know who to contact and how to get in touch with them in order to make these sort of agreements, it's important to make sure that your universal outreach to families is available in multiple formats, in multiple languages, to give information about distance learning services, contacts, etc. Beyond that universal outreach, it's important that case managers or classroom teachers, homeroom teachers, follow up on an individual basis to ensure families have received information, can collaborate on their student-specific needs at the times that have been offered, and that you have double-checked that they have a direct point of contact and a backup to help families navigate this chaotic time. Case managers are a lifeline for students and families, whether we're in a pandemic or not. And regular communication is an expectation for both sides of the collaboration. I mean, the expectation is not just that case managers are reaching out, but that families are responding, reaching out, providing needed information, and that you are keeping track of your successful and unsuccessful attempts to establish this reciprocal relationship. This ongoing communication is going to be of particular importance, I believe, this year when students' learning context has the potential to change multiple times. I think we need to be prepared for having a lot of touch points with parents so that we can see how our students' needs are changing and how we can change to meet them. So there are many things going on in the homes of our students. So leveraging parents as partners, identifying these times to meet to provide services is really important. It's especially important when you have students and families that may need more assistance to access remote instruction. Okay, so we're going to be looking at ways that we can identify folks who may need some support, but I just want to underscore here that all of these key points that are true for everyone are especially true if you identify students or groups of students or families and groups of families that may need more support to be your partner. Okay. As always, LEAs should use prior written notice to document team decisions about extensions. And when you're making any kind of a change, including and especially an extension, right, to complete something or to provide something, please ensure that you document the flexibilities you considered and the ones not just that you selected, but also the options that the team rejected. We've created a service decision-making or service adaptation tool that I can share with you in a few moments. That is a great place to record that information. Additionally, you should document student-related service refusal. All right. So we're just trying to get better at this. We're building the plane while we're flying it. We already know how to do continuous improvement because we know what IEPs are, and that's what they're for, right? They're continuous improvement tools for individual students with disabilities. But we need some continuous improvement tools for all of our kids. for our practice and for our response to shifting very suddenly and unexpectedly from brick and mortar classroom to a virtual one. So all of these principles, right, that we are building systems, implementing them, checking our data to see if they're working, learning from it, making it better, all of these principles are applicable to helping individual students, to helping students across all tiers, and also to helping your team get better at suddenly doing a new job that they didn't do before. So, as we think about how we're going to do this, we have to figure out how we're going to determine and address families' needs for support. So we're going to gather their input, and that's when we're going to get to the fun part. We're going to think about how we can adapt the things we already did to engage families for a new remote context. We're also going to think about how we can apply the principles, multi-tiered systems of support, to our students in this context, but also to developing tiered supports for families. These principles are true for anyone, whether you're talking about kids, families, staff members, it works. Okay. Just a reminder, we're going to share our specific solutions today. I'm going to go peek and see how many folks we've got. Oh, got some alligators, some cheetahs, some lemurs. Okay, we've got 11 folks in the document, and we've got 39 attendees. So I'm going to drop the link one more time to make sure we get more folks in our document. There we go. Because you're going to take some notes in here. Oh, look at that. See that multiplying? We're getting there. No pressure. So this is your digital chart paper. And when we get in here, right, in just a few minutes, we're going to start talking and asking and answering questions in this chart paper. And then there's going to be some time for questions in the chat and the Q&A throughout. But really, don't be afraid to just dump your ideas in here. This is our group 40-person brainstorm. So don't be afraid to really dig in and put things in here, because we want to be able to benefit from each other's thinking, even though we can't be face-to-face. I'm going to ask my co-panelists to go on mute. Thank you. Just 1 second, guys. Can you do me a favor? Can you give me a raised hand if you no longer hear background noise? Okay. Thank you. Appreciate you. Okay. So we're going to move on now if we don't have this backup noise. The first thing we're going to talk about is the big toolkit itself, how we're going to gather input from students, families, teachers, and other providers. So if you have previously attended one of these sessions, this is where Kelly would typically jump in and tell you about the amazing tools that she's made. I'm going to walk you through it today, and we're going to switch over to looking at the tool. I just encourage you, as just a reminder, to look at the electronic version of the forms, so the PDF version of the electronic forms, that you're not trying to open, 15 different tools and look at them, but just go ahead and look at those the PDF version of those forms. I shared it with you earlier, and it looks like this, okay? So the Sample Student Data Tool and User Guide allows you to collect and analyze data regarding student engagement and student progress. We're going to take a deep dive into that tool today. But as I said, I really think you want to use the PDF sample so that you don't have 100 windows open. So, few disclaimers. It's very important that I share with you today. So OSSI has drafted a template that you and your LEA can use to help bring communication, engagement, and progress and service delivery data into view in one place, a one-stop shop for gathering all this information you're going to need to serve students, to mitigate regression, to support recovery, to determine whether students have received educational benefit, to make sure that you're reaching all of your students and that people aren't falling between the cracks just because you can't see them face to face. But I want to make 3 really important points about the tool. The first point is that it's your responsibility to work with your LEA leaders to ensure that you follow all of their data privacy protocols. This suite of tools is designed to collect and source sensitive student information, so you want to make sure that wherever you put the tool is FERPA compliant. We're going to share it with you in Google, but that's only because that's the easiest way to share it across all the different LEAs and the tools that they use. If your LEA has ensured that your Google access is FERPA compliant, then you can use it in Google. But if your LEA does not use Google Drive to share or store that information, you can download the templates and store them in a secure cloud-based application. Another point I'd like to make here is if you are a larger LEA that does not use Google and you would like, or really any LEA that doesn't use Google, and you would like to speak with us about creating this whole suite of tools that we're about to review in a different platform, we are more than happy to discuss that with you. So, this brings me to my second point. This tool is really just a sample of what you and your LEA can be doing to use data to make decisions at this challenging time. You can customize and use this tool in whichever way makes sense for your LEA. I'm going to show you a lot. And you can use all of it, some pieces of it, or none of it. But we really hope that there are at least a few pieces here that will be useful for you and your team. The tool is yours, and once you copy it into your Google Drive or wherever else it's safe for your LEA to use, OSSI can't see your data and is not going to be collecting data via this tool. This is our final point. This is the fun part. This tool does not replace SEDS. Womp womp. SEDS continues to be the system of record, and everything that you are required to report in SEDS, you're still required to report in SEDS, even if you use this tool perfectly. As you see, there are redundancies, and that's the reason for my womp womp. Yes, creating some redundancies here with SEDS. It's up to you and your team to decide which process works best for you. If your team is able to easily navigate SEDS, you might not need all of the pieces of the toolkit. But if you'd like to have everything in one place, it might be worth inputting some of the data elements that you also input into SEDS here. Another important note is that in the same regard, is that other LEAs will not be able to see what you put in this tool. So you still need to upload information to SEDS that's going to be helpful to the receiving school in the case that a student transfers LEAs. Having said both of those things, having all of this information in one place gives you a very easy way to generate data-driven evidence PDFs that you can then upload to SEDS. So for example, if you were going to have students, like any student, right, you wanted to monitor their progress remotely and you're monitoring it using this tool, you'll be able to generate student-level reports that are PDFs and then drop them into SEDS, and that will be much more meaningful than the small amount of information that people often are able to see in the progress monitoring section on SEDS. Also, If you are a special education coordinator and you want to make sure that people are keeping up on their data collection and progress monitoring, it is much easier to see that that is happening in this tool than it is to see that that is happening in SEDS. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute. All right, here we go. Whoops, hold on. All right, can you give me a hands up if it just switched to a Google Sheet? Example, yep, thank you so much. So this tool, well, I got it. Thank you so much. You know, when you raise your hand, it goes beep, beep in my ear. I still ask you to do it anyway because I want to make sure I know that you're all on the same page. Okay, so this tool is a lot, but it's very useful. It relies on input from forms. We'll be talking about these forms in just a moment, but the highlight is that these forms are designed to collect information on communications with students and parents, as well as to log educator feedback and information from service attempts. It feeds into a student dashboard and a summary dashboard, which displays information on all students in the workbook. We're going to look at the input forms in just a little bit, but first we're going to look at the student dashboard. So if you look across the bottom, you'll see several tabs. The page we were on for a little bit was the instruction page. In addition to this page of instructions, I uploaded a user guide to the email into this webinar, and you will get the user guide in a follow-up email, and it has much more detail than this instructions for use. The next tab you'll see is a summary dashboard, which we'll look at in a little bit, a summary of student and family needs, individual student pages, service trackers, etc. So right now we're going to start on the student level dashboard. The top of the page, you will see the purpose and some instructions. Here you will see some basic student information. Some of the cells are gray and some of them are white. Okay, so the gray fields are the ones you have to fill out. The rest of the data is populated automatically when people complete the forms that feed this tool. So there are teacher input forms, case manager input forms, parent forms, student forms, all of that, and they will populate into these white boxes. You just have to add the student's name and case manager. The next section is a list of needs that have been identified by the family, student, or educator through our survey input forms, which I'll show you in just a moment. For example, if a student said they needed help with time management and a parent said they wanted help with food security, both of those needs would populate here whenever you look at the student sheet, so that you don't lose those needs in a flurry of data. So the kinds of things that they're always on, those other duties as assigned of a special education case manager, those things are going to pop right up top, okay? This is the sort of thing that you would sort of just know if you saw a kid every day, but in a remote context or in a situation where a lot of students' home situations may have changed, we thought it would be really helpful to document this at the very top. The next section is engagement information that reports engagement in instruction as reported by educators and engagement in service delivery as reported by service providers, both special education teachers and related service providers. And it allows you to take attendance and to document either availability or unavailability for service. So you've got, are students engaging in synchronous sessions? Are they doing the asynchronous work? Are they working on assignments? Are they finishing them? Are students attending their service sessions? what are the students telling us about their engagement? Because maybe it's different than what we're hearing from parents. There's a place for you to put assessment results here. This is kind of open-ended and customizable because you may be using different tools to assess student progress throughout the year than you normally would. You definitely will be using different tools than you normally would. And so you can capture that information here and just change these labels on your own copy so that you can keep up with assessment results in one place. If you are someone who has come to my IEP Quality Series, you will be familiar with this progress monitoring tracker in which you put in student scores on progress monitoring probes, and it spits out little cool pivot tables that show you how kids are doing on each goal. And there's a family communication log, student communication log, an educator communication log, and a service tracker at the bottom. So it is a lot, and it seems like a lot, but we try to include everything you might possibly want to collect. That doesn't mean you have to use it all, but we have made it for you if you want to keep it and put it to work. The next part of the tool that I want to share with you is the summary dashboard. Earlier in my conversation I'm having with myself, I should say, I told you that that you'd be able to see the values that were underlying this just beyond the compliance concern. And I think this summary dashboard is where those values show up most obviously. We'll discuss that in depth as we go through it, but I just wanted to point out to you that we have tried to make it impossible to lose data about whether students are physically safe and in like some big pile of data. We wanted it to land right up front. So this is the summary dashboard, and it aggregates information about your students all in one place. So that this is where if you're an MTSS person and your eyes are starting to light up, they should be, because you could take this, do some minor tweaks to it, and turn it into an MTSS dashboard where you are getting information about your students that can help you figure out what interventions are needed in groups, individually, and then universally as you roll into this next school year. So the idea of this dashboard is to provide highlights and summaries from all the data from all the students using the input forms that we'll look at in a moment and the dashboard for your team. You and your team should decide if you want to use these tools and how, depending on your context and existing systems. It might make sense for your whole LEA to use one big set of tools like this, or you might make multiple copies of this and have like one summary dashboard for elementary and one for middle. You might have different summary dashboards by campus. It just depends on the size of your LEA and how you plan to use it. You may want to group by school or cluster or classroom. You can make as many copies of the tool as you want. So each school can have their own workbook, their own set of forms, so on and so forth, so that you're not getting multiple school buildings, workbooks mixed up with each other. The key is that you should talk with your team about who should use this summary form and how you'll use these tools and if you're going to use them. So the first section, as I mentioned, is a list of immediate needs. So the date that the need was communicated, the student's name, and the source of the information will all auto-populate here directly from the forms. So at the end of the day, as embarrassingly excited as I get about data, I'm much more excited about knowing that I'm not neglecting a student's physical health, safety, food security, and our concerns about their emotional well-being. because I have just too much data that I cannot find those. So we put it right at the top. The next thing down is very similar. It's a summary of context with families, students, educators, and providers. And so it's here to provide a total count and a count in the last 30 days. The idea is to use the input forms. It's to summarize the use of the input forms because we rely on them. So if people are not using the forms, you'll see that. If you're not collecting the information you hope to, you'll see that. But you'll also see when families haven't been contacted in the past 30 days. That's important because if you haven't contacted families in the past 30 days, you don't actually know the answers to these questions. You don't know if students are safe. And so it's definitely worth having that kind of close to the top. The next section is engagement data, which is similar to the student dashboard, except it also calls out students with 0 minutes of attendance or assignment attempts. That's a window into student well-being in remote learning, and it would be important for you to quickly identify students who are not engaging. So you will see 0% engaged, and it'll pop up, and you'll be able to open the report. Here's a report that will put the student's name that hasn't attempted anything across synchronous, asynchronous, service provision, so attempts or attendance. And because we're OSSI, we also wanted you to see the other emergencies, but we did put them at the bottom. That's overdue IEPs due in the next 30 days, overdue eligibilities, and eligibilities due in the next 30 days. So that information that auto-populates comes from a student list that you create a list of your students, and it looks a lot like a caseload list. Last name, first name, IEP due date, eligibility, due date, and then it will auto-populate the last recorded communication. Deep breath. That is a lot, okay? A lot. Submit your questions right now via chat or Q&A. Let's take a breath, and then we will look at some input forms. I'm going to use my wait time. Any questions? Okay, give me a green check if you don't have any questions because you want to hurry up and hear more. Give me a red X if you don't have any questions because it's too much. You're like, ugh. Both answers are correct. Yes, both answers are correct. So it is a lot. Just to let you know, there are going to be more sessions, more follow-up sessions, and those follow-up sessions I'm going to break into smaller sessions and hold them on teams. So when you fill out the survey, the first survey, the one I send you, or drop the link in, it will ask you if you want to participate in a follow-up, indicate if you're interested, because I would really love to have the opportunity to speak with you and to have you be able to speak back with me. I see some comments in the Q&A, like it is a lot, but we will use it. It makes record keeping less complicated for case managers. Thank you, I hope so. So I just want you to remember, it's a sample. You can copy it, you can use it as it is, you can customize it, you can not use it at all. Just as long as you're thinking about what we've put in here and why we think it is so important to collect this information. It's addressing immediate needs, engaging families, engaging students and educators, tracking engagement, using data to drive decision making. All of those things are made more possible by the use of this tool. So let me see what's next here. Okay, I'm going to show you some input forms real quick, and then we're going to ask some questions. I'm going over time here. So I just want to show you what the input form looks like. It looks like your standard Google form. Actually, I'm going to start with the family input form. Whoop. There we go, the family input form. Give me a green check if you see the family input form. Super, thank you so much. So again, there's a lot in here to collect. The first thing I'm going to tell you before I scroll through this giant Google form is the first time at least that you do this with a family, I recommend that you use it as an interview form. Not that you say, I'm sending you a link, go do it. I would use it to conduct an interview where you use this to collect the information, because then your conversation will be recorded as part of this data set, but you're also sort of practicing the parent and being able to answer their questions as you go about what the questions are really trying to ask of them and how they should respond. So there's some basic information that you need to collect: first name, last name, always needs to be spelled the same way for it to populate in the form correctly. How you communicated, why you communicated, homeroom teacher, how the parent prefers to be contacted. Look, that's positive right there. Then getting the parent's input on if their concerns about remote learning and how it's going for their students. When is your child available to engage in remote learning or service provision? You will see there's no evening times here. Okay, that doesn't mean that that's appropriate for everyone. So you can customize this. You can go in, you can edit it, you can add more times, you can add more days. All of that is possible so that you can make it meet your model in your LEA. There's a long answer text where people can put their own input, then how parents are experiencing special education service provision. Again, you can customize these questions if you have particular concerns that you want to dig a little deeper into. And then here are those questions about like additional needs for support. The first box is mostly things that have to do with learning and academics. The next box is more about a family's needs that may be more urgent, and they can request a meeting as well. Your responses will generate graphs, charts, and of course, as always, you can download it into a separate spreadsheet that you can play with and make pivot tables. Okay, so that parent input form, the student input form, and the teacher input form are all very similar and born directly out of the input forms that we use in the IEP quality series. In part 1, we're talking about developing present levels. So if you're familiar with those and you've been using them and your families are familiar, this will not be that new to them. There's the teacher. I'm going to try to show you the teacher input form really quick. Very, very similar again. It's letting you catch that attendance data. It's also allowing you to collect information that you can use for progress monitoring or present level statements. Strengths, needs, additional concerns, how the accommodations and modifications going, our use of those accommodations and modifications are going in the remote context or the blended context, and any additional comments that they'd like to share. Okay, so when I'm talking about input forms, that's what I'm talking about. For students, very similar, but we start off with, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? Like, how are you feeling? because that's going to be really important information to have. All right, now you've seen it, the bells and whistles, and there are more bells and whistles, but we're going to take a deep breath first. And we're going to zip on into our first question. Okay, so when you see these questions, that means it's time for you to start inputting responses into that to our digital chart paper. So I'm going to switch over to our digital chart paper, and we're going to kind of take a couple of moments to record our thoughts about some of these questions. Let me swap over now. There he is. All right. So first things first, you can see 4 questions at the top. How can you use this tool to enhance the quality of communication with families? How can you use it to enhance the way you give information out and how you get information? And how can you use it to build collaboration with families into your systems for special education service provision? So find a box that isn't highlighted in someone else's color, that doesn't already have an anonymous koala in it or whatever, and write some of your thoughts down. You can scroll down as far as you want to under any particular question, but I want to see some answers in here. I think it would be great, and I want to encourage you to revisit this when you've had time to dig through the tools. And as you find ways to customize the tool, you can record the cooler, better things that you could come up with than we did right here, and we'll use them to improve what we're doing for everyone. So go ahead and take about 4 minutes and respond to some of these questions. So we've got about 30-ish people in here. So I'm going to expect to get like, oh, I don't know, about 10 cool new ideas. I'm going to put myself on mute for a moment, drink some water. It's a lot of talking. So while you're typing, I'm going to respond to a question that came in the Q&A box. Someone asked, how often are these forms to be completed? If I were doing this and I were in the classroom, my minimum would be beginning of school year, interim, and quarter. However, having said that, if there's a big change in how students are going to school, so if you go from virtual to blended or blended to brick and mortar or from blended back to virtual, right, I would do it again then, because what you're trying to do is do what IDEA demands of you, which is make decisions about children based on their circumstances. And when there are big changes in their circumstances, you want to have the data you need to describe and respond to them. Does that answer your question, Q&A person? Good deal. Guys, can you hear me? Have you been able to hear me the last little bit? Give me a red X if you haven't. Oh, dear Lord. Oh, no. Just one moment. I froze for a minute there. Did we stop here? Can you give me a green check if this is where we left off? This is where I froze. Thank you. Sorry about that, guys. I lost you for just a moment. Somebody said they thought it was a long work session. Yeah, it's a really long work session. I was frozen. Okay, so we're going to talk about adapting these engagement strategies for the remote context. I was noting that in the, I was talking to you about how in the digital chart paper, there was someone who commented that taking all of that data in would help you to identify needs for support that you might use to design parent workshops or parent supports based on like themes or domains of need. And that is absolutely true. An example of that might be, I'll go back, might be citywide what we did over the spring and into the summer. The different surveys of families helped us to recognize that there was such a great need for access to technology and the internet, and that we had to have a citywide solution to make sure that folks had the tools that they needed and the internet access that they needed to be able to help their children learn, right? So that's an example of taking the data and creating targeted supports. It wouldn't be individualized because there was quite a swath of students that needed that kind of support, quite a swath of families. It'd be like a tier 2, right? The same thing is going to be true at your school, and it's also not enough to make sure that people have the access to computers and internet service that they need. Their families are going to need support to partner effectively for remote instruction or service delivery. Is anyone here going to be teaching preschool remotely? Raise your hand. You're going to be teaching preschool virtually. Okay, so we got a couple of hands raised right now. Those folks are going to need strong systems for partnering with families to ensure service delivery and instruction. Parents are truly going to be instructional partners, and we can't overlook that, and this data will help us figure out exactly what it is that they need. Finally, you're not going to be able to do the same old for parent engagement, you know, the greatest hits. So school-wide events like back-to-school night, parent-teacher conferences, how are those going to be different remotely? How is sharing student progress going to be different? How are IEP team meetings going to be different? How are those processes going to be different? How are you going to ensure everybody gets information, feels heard, and stays engaged, right? You're going to have to redo that. So we created a form that you can use, and this might be an interesting activity to do with staff as you get back into school. It can definitely be done electronically. For thinking through how you're going to change your school-wide events and initiatives, what are the barriers you're going to be facing remotely and in blended context to doing what you've always done? And how are you going to change it up so that you're still providing people with the same sort of sense of community and sense of engagement and opportunity to be heard and be engaged, but from a distance. The same concerns are true when you think about parent, student, teacher conferences or IEP team meetings. The things that we've done in the past just won't work now. How can we still establish a sense of being a team when we can't be face-to-face? So this is something that you can certainly use, and it is linked inside your toolkit as well. Before we go to our questions, we'll go back here. I'm going to give us about 3 minutes, and I promise really 3 minutes. If I freeze, someone give me a heads. If you don't hear from me in 3 minutes, let me know, and I'll reset my screen. We're going to go into the second tab here, and it's how are you going to use this information to effectively partner with families, think through how you do family engagement in a universal way. Yeah, so go ahead. We can get like 4 or 5 new ideas in the second tab, Adapt Universal Family Engagement Strategies for the Remote Context. I would love it. Then we're going to move on in 3 minutes. And thank you to those of you who let me know that you could not hear me. So I see from a previous session that someone mentioned transportation, and I don't think that we have really explicitly called out transportation concerns in the forms, at least not in a real obvious way, and we certainly haven't broken it out, but I think that would be a customization option that would maybe be really important to folks, particularly when we start transporting students on alternating days, if that is the model that we'll move to when we're no longer all virtual. It may definitely be worth having a place to track any difficulties that people are having, knowing which days they're supposed to come and which days they're not, and getting to their transportation, because that is the kind of thing that would require an immediate intervention, and you would want that to show up. So I appreciate that transportation was mentioned, and I hadn't really thought about how urgent it would be to resolve those issues, and I think those issues are inevitable. All right, give me a heads up if you can hear me. Thank you, appreciate you. All right, finally, using the data tool to develop tiered supports for families. What you have here is a free framework for jumping headfirst into a multi-tiered system of support. And so let's think about that through the lens of our students with disabilities, but also remember that we have a really great tool here that could be used by any educator in your building for whatever it is that they're providing to students. So, whoops. Just a reminder, when we're talking about multi-tiered systems of support, we're talking about universal supports. Those are things that all students are getting. It's important for us to think in a tiered way when we think about the receipt of educational benefit, and we think about recovery for students with disabilities, because the regression or lack of progress for students with disabilities is compared not to like pre-COVID, but it's compared to their opportunities in general education. So you need to have a pretty clearly defined tiered system of supports for recovery for all of your students, so that you can contextualize what you do for your students with disabilities within that general education context and your recovery efforts for all of those students. The second, the yellow middle here, is the targeted supports. And so you may notice some common needs that you can have interventions planned for. that emerge from this data. One of the things that I think about all the time is students having to transition very frequently from home to school and back again, and learning at home and learning in the building, and having to get used to an unusual schedule, or being at home and learning virtually and not knowing when they're going to go back in the building and maybe having anxiety around that. So supporting them around just this new learning context or the multiple transitions they'll be facing when we move to different phases of our public health emergency. Just one second. The other thing that you can do is you can think about the kinds of accommodations that students are needing in a learning from home sort of context, and how you can provide workshops for families on how to meet students' needs and to accommodate in the home. Additionally, there's a tool called the Promising Practice Resource Matrix that's just we did last time. It's just a selection of different resources that you can use to provide students with support. So to develop and deliver engaging instruction, to individualize support. So if you keep going down to the bottom of this, that's also linked in your toolkit, there's a section on supporting families to be instructional partners, helping families facilitate learning at home. You can check out any of these links, and they are rich with ideas for different parent workshops that you might host to empower families to be great partners in remote instruction and service delivery. Again, that's linked in the toolkit along with all the other things. Because of time, I'm going to just encourage you to think about how you can use these tools with families to create tiered support. So if you want to go back in the digital chart paper, see what other folks have already put in, and add your own ideas, that would be fantastic. But I want to make sure we have time for final questions and that you have time to complete the survey so that you get credit for having attended. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to share at this time? Wait just another couple of minutes to see if anybody has any further questions. All righty, so I'm going to drop into the chat. Hold on just a moment. I had a question. Can you expand upon using the prior written notice for communication? So I am going to unmute the asker. Do you want me to unmute you so you can ask so we can get more specific? Yes or no in the chat? I want to put you on the spot. Okay. All right. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes. So I was looking through the distance learning model and everything, and they were saying document everything in the prior written notice, and I just wanted to know, did you have any suggestions, or has anybody else used it in any type of way to include our, I guess, for us to include our distance learning plan in the PWN? I was just trying to get some more information about that.
So I'm going to unmute a member of our policy team now so that she can answer, and then I will follow up with her answer so we are on the same page.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Christy Weaver-Harris with the K-12 policy team. So in the instance of trying to include the distance learning plan with your PWN, I would just make sure that you're explaining in the PWN what it is that you're proposing doing for the student, and then refer to the distance learning plan and just attach it to the PWN itself. I think that you'd be best served including the whole plan, but make sure that you're including information in that PWN about how the distance learning plan is meeting you expect it to meet the unique needs of that student, and not focus on what the restrictions are around your school circumstances, right? We want to make sure that we're designing those learning plans to meet the student's needs, not to meet the school's needs.
Is that helpful? Good deal. Okay, so right now I'm putting in the chat the link to the survey. This is how I'm going to take attendance and have a backup for your PLUs. So if you would please fill out the survey, and please forgive me if you receive yet another survey after I take attendance. I just want to make sure that you all have the opportunity to receive PLUs and to be counted as in attendance, and we've had some issues with our other systems. So bear with me as you have to do 2 surveys, but hopefully we'll get this resolved. I do want to say thank you. Thank you for being patient with me during my long silence. I think I may have been muted, and I really apologize for that. And to invite you to join me next Wednesday for Data-Driven Supports Deep Dive. I'm going to leave this window open for a little bit so that you are able to get the link to the Google Forms. But I am going to sign off from our training now. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I really hope to see you in future more interactive sessions. Thanks for being here, and thanks again to Kelly Scholl, my co-developer, and thank you to Christy Weaver-Harris for joining us today and answering your questions. Hey guys, if it says session 3 on the survey, don't sweat it, it's okay. I will change the name of it.